item number 13 and 14 shall be taken up together. Now, Dr. Shashi Tharoor. Nishikant Dubai, Shri Nishikant Dubai.
धन्यवाद सभापति महोदय. Just behind is my seat and have taken permission. So now this is my block. Mr. Tharoor came, sir.
Okay. Shashi,
Interruption.
Dr. Shashi Tharoor, please.
My apologies, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Chairman. Thank you for this opportunity to present my party's views on the supplementary demands for grants 2022-23. We are meeting at an uncertain time for economic revival in our country. The economy has been laid low ever since demonetization and then shattered by the pandemic and the resultant lockdown. The star performers like tourism and the services sector were devastated and are only now recovering. And if the backbone of the economy, agriculture and the MSMEs, can be described in any one word, they're both in crisis. As I pointed out during the budget debate in this House last February, the government gave us the usual combination of high rhetoric, grand ambition, exaggerated numbers and unrealistic targets, all diluted with underwhelming allocations to crucial sectors. The very fact that the Finance Minister has come back with such a large supplementary demand for grants testifies to this once again. The government had budgeted a total expenditure of 39.45 lakh crores in fiscal year 22-23. But as spending, and as I predicted in this House, has defeated the estimates, excess expenditure has inevitably brought her back to the House with this new request, and the gross additional expenditure she seeks is over 4.36 lakh crores, 11.05% of the entire budget estimate, of which net additional spending constitutes over 3.25 lakh crores, including over 1.0 lakh crores for fertilizer subsidy payments. Now, in the budget speech, I had warned that the significant reduction in fertilizer subsidy by about 25% was untenable. That point has been borne out in the past year when the government has had to augment the original budget of 1.5 lakh crores with an additional 1.10 lakh crores, and that amount is also being breached. To remind, the 2022-23 budget estimate was 1,09,242.23 crores. The supplementary demand raised is for 1,09,288.95 crore. That is more than the original budget itself. I know what my good friend, the Finance Minister, is going to say. She will point to factors beyond her government's control. Now, while the increased cost of imports, including of raw materials, largely due to the Ukraine-Russia conflict, does explain a part of the adjustment, a more than 100% estimate in the budget estimate, a more than 100% increase in the budget estimate, does raise the question as to whether the government is finding it difficult to wrap its collective heads around the evolving situation and is capable of charting a robust future-looking vision. Between 2018-19 and 2020-21, India's fertilizer imports increased almost 8% to 20.33 million tonnes from 18.84 million tonnes. Of course, we can't control all the surprises that global geopolitics may throw up. But regardless, sir, it is indeed a matter of concern that we are becoming increasingly reliant on imports of fertilizers. The government cannot afford to sit tight when the circumstances are favourable and then put blame on external factors when unfavourable conditions arise. We need to be prepared, and it's a matter of concern that all the government's talk on Atmanirbharta hasn't come to our help in this challenging time. To take one example, in March 2022, the government mandated the revival of 6 central PSU fertilizer units to augment domestic production of urea. What is the status of these plants? What is their production? What are we doing to improve self-reliance? No, we're continuing to import, and she has come back for more money. The Standing Committee on Chemicals and Fertilizers, which I have just had the pleasure of becoming chair of, but 2 years ago, under the chairmanship of my good friend Ms. Kanimuri, found that many fertilizer manufacturing facilities are not working at their maximum efficiency and are using highly outdated technology and systems. The government has to bear the cost of this inefficiency through higher subsidy. Capital expenditure was allocated only a measly 0.05 crores in the current budget, and there is no addition in the revised budget, no supplementary for that. So it's doubtful that the government is in fact putting in sufficient resources to focus on the improvement of our infrastructure and capacity. The ill effects of this situation, despite the government's claims of cushioning the impact on farmers, cannot simply be wished away. The government's price protection alleviates the effect of these increases excuse me, sir, only with regard to nitrogenous fertilizer, urea, but not on diammonium phosphate or DAP and muriate of potash, MOP, where subsidies are capped. But prices of these items have inflated due to global market trends, and as many as 5 farmer suicides in the Bundelkhand region have been reported just in the last year on account of fertilizer shortages. Now, nearly half of the DAP requirement is imported, mainly from West Asia, while the domestic MOP demand is met solely through imports also from Belarus, Canada, Jordan, and so on. Where is Atmanirbharta here? There is none of it, sir. The rise in fertilizer prices, in effect, reduces the disposable income of farmers. This income has been declining under the Modi government, in any case, by 8.9% between 2013 and 2019, according to the NSO survey last year. Now, on the topic of farmers, an RTI response by the Agriculture Ministry stated that payments made to beneficiaries under the Prime Minister's much-touted Kisan Samman Nidhi, PM Kisan, have fallen by 67% in the 11th instalment disbursed in October 22. It's probably due to this that the supplementary demand for the Department of Agriculture is quite low, in just 4 lakhs. But what does this say of the government's commitment to farmers' welfare? This is a scheme which provides a minimal support of only 500 rupees a month, which isn't pegged to inflation, nor is it likely to cover the increasing input costs faced by farmers. But even so, the reduced coverage compounds the vulnerability of our Kisans. Respected Chairperson, on the subject of NREGA, Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme, I am sorry to have to serve as Banco's ghost, regularly popping up in our Finance Minister's nightmares to remind her of her sins of omission. During the last debate on the Union budget, I had pointed out that it was a matter of national disgrace that this government had, during a period of record levels of unemployment and distress in our country's economy, particularly the rural economy, chosen to slash the funds for NREGA by nearly 25% or 1/4. With the original allocation of rupees 73,000 crores, it was a move that not only defied logic, but constituted a blatant disregard for the crisis that has engulfed rural India. And what was worse, the original allocation also needed to account for an estimated 20,000 crores in payments pending from the previous year, effectively leaving the scheme this year with a paltry 50,000 crores, whereas most experts have consistently argued that NREGA needs anywhere between 1.3 lakh to 3.4 lakh crores in order to meet burgeoning demand for jobs with the minimum guarantee of 100 days of employment. Don't forget, sir, our unemployment levels in our country today have broken all records. In 2021, we reached the highest figures ever since unemployment figures began to be recorded in the 1930s. That's how bad the situation is. Obviously, relief is required. It's no wonder that even the Ministry of Rural Development had recently sought an urgent infusion of at least 25,000 crores, which sadly does not go far enough to address the current situation and is akin to trying to extinguish a forest fire with a glass of water. As recently as May and June this year, over 30 million individuals had sought work under NREGA. 3 crore people had asked for jobs, sir, a demand that was last seen to such a degree in 2006, which is why the scheme was invented. As many experts have pointed out, the demand represents a 43% increase over pre-pandemic levels, a reflection of the grave challenges of widespread inflation and severe unemployment under which the rural economy is grappling with currently. Further, experts have also highlighted that across the country, pending wages to the staggering tune of 11,097 crores had accumulated as of June this year, sir. No wonder then that as recently as August this year, Manrega workers from over 15 states across the country sat in protest at Jantar Mantar, demanding urgent intervention from this government to address their critical concerns. Sadly, it appears that all their speeches, all their pleas have fallen on deaf ears. While the government may claim that the additional infusion for Manrega could offer some form of atonement for this catastrophic series of omissions, their budgeting of such a paltry infusion makes it clear that they have learned little from their historic disregard of the scheme. The additional outlay of 22,039 crores does not even match the request sought by their own Ministry of Rural Development and is nowhere close to taking the total allocation to the 1.3 lakh crores that experts have called for and that I had called for in this House in February, for the scheme to be sufficiently able to cater to the existing demand for rural work. Respected Chairperson, it's clear that in their logic-defying allocation to Manrega, the government has effectively reduced the two key words of employment and guarantee to hollow, meaningless terms. Neither is enough employment being provided, nor is there any guarantee that employment is assured.
Absolutely right.
The national net balance of Manrega funds is at a deficit of rupees 15,190 crores. Not to mention that almost 9 crore households have demanded work this year, of which 1.42 crore households that have applied are yet to be issued job cards, let alone be provided employment under the scheme. Further, more than 95% of households employed in Manrega this year, 95% have not got 100 days of work. And yet, despite the growing mountain of evidence pointing for the urgent need for redressal, you, Madam Finance Minister, have chosen to offer a token additional sum. In fact, the overall allocation to the rural sector has seen a scale down from rupees 2,16,342 crores to 1,94,633 crores, including the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana Gramin and the National Social Assistance Programme schemes, indicating the government's negligence of the social sector. And while the PM Awas Yojana Gramin had a mandate to build a Pakka house with basic amenities for all homeless families and for all those living in kacha or dilapidated houses, by March 2022 it could achieve only 55% of its target by December last year, forcing the government to extend its deadline to provide Pakka houses to all families in rural India by 2 years. So the deadline, which was meant to be fulfilled by March 2022, is now March 2024. And we all are supposed to let this pass without giving it any thought. Again, promise, under-budgeting, poor implementation, here is the result. And I might say, sir, I know that there is some additional money in the Pradhan Mantri the Kalyan Yojana. But the fact is that throwing sops because you fail to address the underlying problem is no solution at all. The appalling disregard for vulnerable communities extends to other groups as well, including, for instance, groups like our fishermen, who represent some of the most economically challenged groups in our country and for whom there are no supplementary demands in this budget. Fishermen in my constituency of Thiruvananthapuram have had to contend with the severe challenges like the devastation of Cyclone Okhi, the floods of 2018 and 19, and then the pandemic. In addition, they've had to contend with the perennial challenge of coastal erosion that literally washes away their homes, but remains a matter this government has done little about. I've written to the Prime Minister, sir, and pointed out that if China had taken 2 inches of our land, we would all be up in arms saying that they have taken Mother India's territory. Here, the sea has taken away 64 kilometers of territory in my constituency, 64 square kilometers, and no one has bothered to find any money to address these problems. Homes have been toppling into the ocean, sir. Whether it was the budget presented this year or the supplementary demands for grants, it is most unfortunate to note that once again this government has neither looked into offering a special economic package for our coastal communities, as I've repeatedly called for on the floor of this House, nor are there any mitigation efforts by this government, either in terms of fiscal support or kerosene subsidies, which we know have been abolished, or funds for conversion of kerosene engines to diesel in that case, or even lower GST on nets and fishing equipment. None of that. The fishermen just don't matter to this government. I'm sorry to say that though our own Honourable Prime Minister has often reminded us that the strength of India lies in her villages and that there is a need to bridge the gulf between urban and rural India, it is abundantly clear that this government has no regard for rural India, no regard for the children of the sea, and is actively engaged in widening the chasm between these two Indias. Not just in its disregard for Manrega or our farmers, but through its consistent reduction in the allocation for rural development and social security schemes like the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana Rural, the National Rural Livelihood Mission and the Midday Scheme, and in the neglect of our hard-working fisherfolk. A similar narrative, Mr. Chairman, emerges from the government's disregard for the healthcare sector, which has been consistently underfunded and barely features in the supplementary demands for grants presented by the Finance Minister. As I pointed out earlier this year, despite the frailties in our medical infrastructure that were exposed by the pandemic, the health sector was originally allocated only 200 crore rupees more this year. Yet again, I must say that the overall decrease after factoring inflation was a long way off from the goal envisaged in the National Health Policy 2017, which had announced that they would spend 2.5% of GDP on health. In fact, we all know that a majority, 67.8% of expenditure on healthcare in India comes from out of pockets of ordinary people. Aam Aadmi expenditure is what is sustaining the healthcare business in our country. It's not just one of the highest figures in the world, but pushes almost 55 million of our fellow citizens under the poverty line each year. People are living one serious illness away from poverty, sir. The COVID-19 pandemic has offered a fresh impetus for more financial support from the government, not just in healthcare, but also in critical research on public health. Yet, rather than learn from these lessons, the government has only nominally increased funds for the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, and there is no significant number in the supplementary demands for grants. Now, we note that 22,000 crores are to be paid to the oil marketing companies for their losses on LPG cylinder sales. There are no supplementary allocations specifically for their losses on fuel. But I would like to draw the attention of this House to the troubling fact that government data shows that fuel prices are being kept unchanged for weeks and sometimes months before assembly elections, only to be changed soon after. Data from the Oil Ministry's Petroleum Planning and Analysis Cell shows that petrol and diesel prices have been controlled, that most of the control is exerted in the months leading up to an assembly election and are relaxed once the assembly elections are over. For example, an excellent article in the print today shows that prices were kept unchanged for 5 days before the assembly elections in Arunachal Pradesh, Andhra Pradesh and Sikkim in April 2019 and changed after. By the time the Bihar elections were held in November 2020, prices were kept unchanged for 51 days before the last date of polling and then began to be changed within 2 weeks after. Before the West Bengal elections in 2021, fuel prices were kept unchanged for 31 days before the last date of polling and were changed just 5 days after. Then, of course, the duration of unchanged fuel prices rose sharply because of oil prices in the international market. Before the 5 assembly elections in February-March of this year, UP, Goa, Manipur, Punjab, Uttarakhand, prices were kept unchanged for a whopping 4 months prior to the last day of polling. Notably, the revision of prices resumed just 2 weeks after the elections got over. And the recently concluded elections in Himachal and then Gujarat showed a similar trend. Fuel prices were kept unchanged for more than 8 months before the last day of voting in Gujarat, and it remains to be seen for how long these prices will remain unchanged now that the elections are over. I say this, sir, because while the Finance Minister will say that pricing decisions lie with the oil marketing companies, that is unlikely to be the case since it's clear that it is the oil marketing companies that have to bear the brunt of having to buy expensive oil and sell fuel at cheaper prices to suit the government's political convenience. This will ultimately pose a cost to us, the taxpayers, either in terms of any bailouts the government has to transfer to these companies to cover their losses, or to all of us as consumers, because even with world oil prices reducing as they now or in the future, fuel prices in India will be kept high so these companies can recover their losses. Otherwise, yet another supplementary demand for grants will be needed, Mr. Chairman. Now, let me try and pull all this together. During my intervention at the time of the debate on the union budget in February, I'd pointed out that we'd have to look at the macroeconomic figures presented by the finance minister with healthy skepticism. And in many ways, the supplementary demands for grants we've got confirm this suspicion. For instance, the additional demands confirm that it's unlikely that the government will be able to stick to its claim of a 9.5% fiscal deficit target, which itself, of course, represented a 6% rise from last year's target. The current cash outgo of 2,99,000, basically 3 lakh crores, clearly shows that the government will be unable to stick to its own intentions of capping the fiscal deficit at 6.8% of GDP. Now, while we in the opposition can understand the critical need for government spending as a result of the pandemic, and we ourselves have been calling for some government spending the government has not been willing to do, like MREGA, we urge the government to stop presenting unrealistic targets before the House and offer more transparent numbers before this country. Take, for instance, the disinvestment targets. The previous fiscal targets relied all too much on the unrealistic assumption that the government would receive 1.7 lakh crores in disinvestment receipts. But we all know this government has failed to meet their disinvestment target in 4 out of 6 years since 2014. In the rare instances where they've managed to do so, it has only been made possible by the comical situation where one PSU has bought shares from another PSU. That track record extends to this year as well. At the end of October, the government has only managed to raise 9,333 crores, according to data from the Controller General of Accounts. Moreover, while a lot was said about the sale of the national carrier Air India to the Tata Group, a significant component of these demands for grants involves a 62,057 crore allocation for the Air India Asset Holding Company Limited, which carries the burden of the majority of the debt that the carrier was under. As part of the sale, the government has remained liable for nearly 46,000 crores, a debt that has been unfairly passed on to the taxpayers. I've been listening to the late Jaitley ji's and now Madam Sitharaman's budgets attentively since 2014, Mr. Chairperson. Every single year, he and she have announced fiscal deficit targets, and every single year they have failed to meet them. You have mentioned privatization targets and failed to meet them. You projected improvements in the tax to GDP ratio, and you failed to meet those. You promised Achhe Din, and now you've moved the goalposts some 25 years into the future, when none of you will be around to be accountable for that either. I'll wrap up in a minute, Mr. Speaker. I'm sorry to say that the underlying vision that this government has presented, first through the Union Budget 22-23 and now in these supplementary demands for grants, is a story of failure, a fondness for grand announcements followed by consistently inadequate implementation.